The small town of Harmony Creek, nestled in the green hills of Ohio, was a place that valued its traditions and its heroes. Flags hung from every porch on Main Street. On Memorial Day, the town square was always packed, and the high school marching band played with a heartfelt passion. In Harmony Creek, it was a given that you honored the military, and you especially honored your own. This was the town where Clara Mae Jenkins chose to settle. After a decade and a half away, she came back to the two-story brick house her parents still lived in, the same house where she'd grown up. Clara was a quiet woman in her late 30s. She wasn't cold, but she wasn't chatty either. She had kind eyes that held a shadow of something deep and distant, and a handshake that was firm and confident. She found work at a local auto shop, not as the lady who ran the front desk, but as one of the mechanics. She was good with her hands and even better with an engine. She could listen to a sputtering motor and know exactly what was wrong, like a doctor hearing a heart murmur. At first, the people of Harmony Creek just thought she was a bit odd. They were used to their young people leaving for the big city and coming back different. But soon the whispers started. It began with the men at the local diner, and it spread to the church potlucks and the grocery store. "You see Clara down at the garage?" one man would say. "Heard she was in the army, a real tough one." "A woman in the army?" Another would chuckle. "Bet she was just a secretary or something. A nurse, maybe." The leader of this small, unspoken campaign was a man named Frank Reynolds. Frank was the kind of man who filled a room just by walking into it. He had a booming voice and a way of talking with his hands that made you think every word was gospel. He was in his mid-50s, with a thick head of gray hair and a constant scowl that he seemed to wear as a badge of honor. Frank had served in the Army a long time ago, and he never let anyone forget it. He ran the local veterans group and was a regular speaker at town events. His stories were always bigger, his battles more dangerous, his courage more epic than anyone else's. One day, at a town hall meeting about a new park for veterans, Frank was at the podium. He told a story about a top-secret mission in the desert, about a close call with a mortar shell, and how he and his team had to fight their way out. He spoke of bravery and classified operations with a dramatic pause. The audience of older men and women, many of them with husbands who had served, listened with wide, impressed eyes. After he finished, a friendly woman from the crowd, a neighbor of Clara's mother, pointed over to Clara, who was sitting quietly in the back. "Frank," she said, "Clara served too. Why don't you ask her about her time in the service?" Clara looked up, her expression unreadable. Frank turned, a condescending smile on his face. He looked at her, then back at the crowd, as if sharing a private joke. "Well now, Clara," he said, his voice dripping with fake kindness, "where did you serve? Did you run a switchboard or something?" Clara didn't flinch. She stood up slowly, her shoulders straight. "I was with the Delta Force," she said, her voice clear and without a hint of emotion. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with disbelief. Then the first person chuckled. It was a low, uncertain sound, but it was enough. Frank threw his head back and let out a huge, roaring laugh that shook the room. The sound was like a hammer blow. He pointed a finger at Clara, tears of mirth in his eyes. "Delta Force!" he bellowed. "Honey, you don't even know what that is. There are no women in Delta Force. It's the most elite, most secret unit in the military. You think they'd let a little girl like you in? I would know. I trained with some of those guys. I was Special Forces." He said the words with a reverence that was meant to crush her. He stepped closer to her, his face now a mask of smug victory. "If you're so tough, if you were really in a unit that's secret, tell us a code word." "Go on, recite a code word. Anything at all." Clara didn't say anything. She just stared at him, her gaze unwavering. The silence stretched. People started to whisper. A few of the men who had been laughing with Frank now looked at her with pity. They saw a woman who had tried to pretend to be something she wasn't and had been caught. They saw a liar. Clara took a deep breath, and without a word, she turned and walked out of the room. The sound of her boots on the hardwood floor was the only thing anyone could hear. Frank stood there, his chest puffed out, a conquering hero in his own mind. His laughter was the last sound she heard as she walked out into the cool evening air, leaving her dignity and her reputation behind. She didn't know it then, But this public humiliation was only the beginning. The mockery had a life of its own now, and it was about to follow her everywhere she went. After the town hall meeting, the laughter became the new common sound in Clara's life. It wasn't always loud and public like Frank's was. Sometimes it was just a nervous little titter from the woman at the grocery store checkout. Other times it was a low, muttered comment from a group of men as she walked by. They saw her, and they saw a fraud. Her reputation was ruined. The local auto shop's owner, a man named Bob, wasn't a bad person, but he was afraid of what the town might think. He took her aside one day, his hands twisting a greasy rag. "Clara, you're good at this work," he said, avoiding her eyes. "Real good, but business has been slow. Maybe it's best if you took some time off." She didn't argue. She just nodded, gathered her tools, and left. She felt a familiar weight on her shoulders, a feeling she had known on lonely nights in foreign lands, the quiet disappointment of the world. She had faced danger and had survived, but this small town and its quiet cruelty were a different kind of war. The shame was a heavy blanket, not just for her, but for her parents, too. Her father, a proud man who had served in the Navy, looked at her with a mix of confusion and hurt. "Clara, why did you say that?" he asked one night at the dinner table. "You know people talk. Delta Force, that's not something to lie about." Her mother just kept her head down, her fork scraping her plate. Her silence a louder accusation than any words. Clara tried to explain, but the words felt hollow. They wouldn't understand. Her work was a secret, not a story to be told at a town meeting. She was bound by a different kind of honor. As she spent her days at home, she felt the walls of the small town closing in on her. The loneliness was profound. She found herself wandering to a small, quiet part of the town cemetery. It was where the true heroes lay, the ones who had no flashy stories. She would sit on a bench, looking at the simple stone of a man named David Thompson, a World War II veteran. His stone just said, "Sergeant, U.S. Army." No medals, no grand words. Just the truth. One day, while she was sitting there, a small elderly woman came up to her. She was frail and moved slowly, using a cane. She had a kind face, with a web of lines around her eyes that crinkled when she smiled. "You must be Clara," the woman said. "My name is Eleanor Thompson." "David was my husband," Clara nodded, surprised. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am." "Oh, it was a long time ago," Eleanor said, her voice soft and a little raspy like dry leaves. "He was a good man, a good soldier. He never talked about it much, but I knew. I knew the things he carried with him." "I can tell you carry things too, Clara. Different kinds of things." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She had been so alone, and this woman, a stranger, saw her. Eleanor didn't ask about Delta Force. She didn't mention Frank Reynolds. She just saw the pain in Clara's eyes. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor would often be at the cemetery, tending to her husband's grave. She started bringing Clara small things, a piece of homemade cake, a jar of sun-brewed sweet tea, a small bag of fresh tomatoes from her garden. They would sit on the bench and talk, not about the past, but about the simple, everyday things of life, the changing seasons, the quiet beauty of Harmony Creek, the way the light fell through the old oak trees. One afternoon, Eleanor mentioned her husband's collection of military things. "He kept a journal," she said softly. "He never let me read it. Said it was full of boring details and army nonsense, but it was important to him. He called it his quiet book. It's still in a box in the attic. I never had the heart to look at it." Clara didn't say anything, but the words stayed with her. A quiet book. It was the same phrase her team leader, a man named Sergeant Major Johnson, used to call their mission debriefs. The quiet books were the true stories, the ones no one would ever hear. Clara's heart began to beat a little faster. Meanwhile, Frank Reynolds was thriving. He was now the head of the committee to build the new park, and he was raising money with gusto. He was everywhere, holding fundraisers, giving speeches, and basking in the adoration of the town. People saw him as a leader, a hero. He even started using his newfound status to influence local politics, making deals with the town council. He was a lion now, and everyone in Harmony Creek, from the mayor to the local grocer, was afraid to challenge him. Clara, from her small, lonely corner, watched it all happen. She saw the good, honest people of the town being manipulated by a man who was nothing but a fraud. The laughter and the whispers were bad enough when they were aimed at her, but seeing them fall for his lies and put their trust in him felt like a new kind of injustice. It was then, sitting on the bench in the cemetery, that she realized she couldn't just stand by. Her sacrifice in a faraway land meant nothing if she let lies take over her home. She had to do something, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the only way to expose the truth was to speak it. Frank Reynolds' power in Harmony Creek grew with every passing day. The town, believing they had a genuine war hero in their midst, trusted him completely. He used his new influence to get on the town council. His big project, the Veterans Memorial Park, was now a fundraising machine. He promised a grand monument and a beautiful community space, but whispers started to spread that the money wasn't all going to the park. A small part of the funds was being diverted to a private consulting company, Frank's company. No one dared to question him, not when he wore his military service like a suit of armor. Clara watched all of this from her quiet solitude. She saw how Frank would talk down to people, how he would use his vet status to get his way. He wasn't just a blowhard anymore. He was a bully with real power. The injustice of it all began to eat at her. It wasn't about her pride anymore. It was about the people of her town being taken advantage of, and about the very meaning of the words honor and service being twisted by a man who had earned neither. One sunny afternoon, Clara walked to Eleanor Thompson's house. The older woman was sitting on her porch swing, a small pot of flowers beside her. She had been a friend to Clara when no one else would. Clara felt a debt of gratitude she couldn't repay with just words. "Eleanor," Clara said, her voice soft, "I was wondering if I could see your husband's journal." "The one you mentioned, his quiet book." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. She thought about it for a moment, then slowly nodded. "I suppose it's been long enough," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "It's in the attic. I'll get it for you." A few minutes later, Eleanor came back down with a small, worn leather book. The cover was faded and scratched. It was tied shut with a piece of old twine. The twine was knotted in a specific way that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. It was a secure knot, a knot that only soldiers in a certain kind of unit would use. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice almost a whisper. She took the journal and went home. That night, sitting in her room with the door closed, she untied the knot and opened the book. The pages were filled with her husband's neat, sloping handwriting. He had written about his time in the war, not about glory or battles, but about the small, quiet details, the taste of the dirt, the cold of the rain, the fear and the courage of the men around him. He wrote with the honesty of a man who had seen real things. As she turned the pages, she found what she was looking for. A single entry, written in the same neat hand but with a sense of urgency. It was a debrief of a joint operation. It mentioned a team of special operators, an elite group that her husband had provided support for. And then her eyes landed on a specific phrase. The words were a quiet, almost poetic description of the event. But Clara knew what they really were. It was a code phrase, a signal to be used in case of capture or a breach of security. It was a phrase she knew because she had been there. She had been part of the team her husband had supported. She read on, and her heart began to pound in her chest. She read the name of her team leader, Sergeant Major Johnson, the man she had promised to never speak of the mission to. And then she read about a brave act of sacrifice. Her team had been trapped, but her husband's unit had provided a diversion, giving them a chance to escape. He had saved their lives. The bravery was so simple, so quiet, so unlike the grand tales Frank told. Clara also read another thing. A name of a soldier who had also been part of the mission. She didn't know this man, but her husband had written a brief, almost dismissive note about him. "A loud one," the journal entry said. "Told too many stories about what he was going to do. Went on a single supply run and got spooked. Got an award for it, too." The name was Frank Reynolds. A cold, hard knot formed in Clara's stomach. This man had been a coward. He had not only stolen a story, but he had stolen a hero's honor. He was claiming a bravery he never had, and he was using that lie to hurt her and take advantage of the town. The next day, the town had a big fundraiser for the park. Frank was going to give a final big speech to ask for the last of the money. Clara knew this was her chance. She held the journal in her hands, its pages feeling heavy with truth. She wouldn't just challenge Frank on her word. She would challenge him on his. She would use the quiet words of a real hero to silence the loud words of a fraud. She put the journal back, her mind made up. She had been through real combat. She knew what it was to face a real enemy. This was a different kind of battle, but she was a soldier, and she was ready for it. The community center was packed. People had come from all over Harmony Creek to support the new park and to hear Frank Reynolds speak one last time. Frank, dressed in a sharp blazer, stood at the podium with a big smile on his face. He spoke of honor and sacrifice, about the debt they all owed to their soldiers. He told the same story he always told, the one about the mortar shells and the heroic escape, the one he claimed was a top-secret mission that only a few men had ever seen. The crowd was silent, eating up every word. Clara stood near the back, a calm presence in a sea of proud faces. She wasn't wearing anything special, just a pair of jeans and a simple shirt. She held no notebook, no papers. She held only the truth. As Frank finished his speech to a round of applause, he looked out at the crowd, his gaze landing on Clara. A smirk played on his lips. He was enjoying her public humiliation. He thought he had won. "Now, I know there are some in this room who have their own stories," he said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Some who claim to be something they're not." He laughed, and a few people joined in. "They'll tell you all sorts of tall tales, but a real hero doesn't have to lie. A real hero just does the job." He looked directly at Clara, his eyes full of triumph. This was her moment. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Clara took a step forward, her voice clear and strong. It didn't boom like Frank's, but it was so full of quiet power that the room went silent. "I have a story to tell," she said. "A true story." Frank's face fell. He tried to laugh it off. "Clara, we've heard enough of your fantasies. Go on home." "This isn't about me," Clara said, her voice steady. "This is about a real hero, a man named David Thompson." She looked over to Eleanor, who was sitting in the front row. Eleanor gave her a small, trembling nod. "David Thompson?" Frank scoffed. "He was just a sergeant in World War II, a good man, but he wasn't a special operator. He wasn't a hero like me." The room was hushed. People leaned forward in their chairs. Clara ignored him. "I was on a joint operation in a place you've only seen in pictures, Frank. My team was on the ground and we got pinned down. Our radios were silent. We were out of options. We thought we were done." She paused, and the room was so still you could hear a pin drop. And then we heard a voice. A single message, broadcast over a secure channel. A message from a soldier who had no business being there. A brave man who risked his life just to give us a second chance. She looked directly at Frank. His face was starting to turn a shade of gray. His smug smile was completely gone, replaced by a look of sheer cold panic. He shifted on his feet, his hands twitching. He knew what she was about to say. Then Clara said the words. The words that had been a secret between her and her team. The words written in Eleanor's husband's quiet book. "The harvest moon has no shadow." The phrase hung in the air like a ghost. It wasn't a single word, but it was a sentence filled with meaning. It was the code phrase for a rescue operation that had been kept a secret for decades. It meant they had to move, and quickly, and that a brave soul was taking the risk to get them out. Frank's face was as pale as a sheet. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the crowd, at the people who had cheered him, and he saw nothing but suspicion in their eyes. He knew he was caught. Clara didn't stop. She kept talking, her voice low and confident, telling the rest of the story about how David Thompson and his team had set a fake trap to draw the enemy's attention, how he had given up a medal for his act of bravery because he believed the only reward was saving lives, and how Frank, who had been on a single supply run far away, had used a radio log he wasn't meant to see to create his entire fake story. "He didn't fight his way out of anything," Clara said, her eyes boring into Frank's. "He never saw a single mortar shell. The man who saw that was Eleanor's husband, David. He was the one who was the hero. The room erupted into a chaos of shouts and murmurs. People were standing up, pointing at Frank, their faces a mix of outrage and disbelief. Frank looked at Clara, then at the mob of angry faces, and the last shred of his dignity broke. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked away, disappearing into the angry crowd, his great lies crumbling around him like a house of cards. The laughter was gone now. In its place was a stunned, respectful silence. Clara stood alone on the stage, the quiet hero who had finally spoken the truth. The town of Harmony Creek had been fooled, but now they saw a real soldier, a real hero, and she was one of their own. The aftermath of the meeting was a powerful silence. The town of Harmony Creek was shocked, humbled, and ashamed. They had so eagerly believed Frank's big stories and had just as eagerly laughed at Clara's quiet truth. Now they saw him for what he was, a loud, empty man. And they saw her for what she was, a true soldier, who carried her honor not on her sleeve, but deep in her heart. The very next day, people started to seek her out. The owner of the auto shop, Bob, came by her parents' house, his face red with apology. "Clara, I was an idiot," he said. "Please, your job is waiting for you, and I'll pay you double." She just gave him a small, kind smile and said, "Thank you, Bob. I'll think about it." Her parents were the most changed. Her father, his eyes filled with a pride she hadn't seen since she was a little girl, hugged her tight. "I should have believed you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Her mother cried and held her hand, saying, "You were a hero, Clara, a true hero. I'm so sorry." Clara simply said, "You have nothing to be sorry for. I did what I had to do." The true justice, however, wasn't about the job or the apologies. It was about the truth. The story spread like wildfire, not just through Harmony Creek, but to the next towns over. Reporters called, wanting to hear her story, but she refused. Her service wasn't for the cameras. It was for her country. The powerful twist, the final layer of her story, was revealed in a quiet conversation with Eleanor. Clara was a Delta Force intelligence operator. She was never meant to be on the front line with a rifle. Her job was to gather information, to be a ghost, to know things no one else knew. Her strength wasn't in brute force, but in her sharp mind, her calm demeanor, and her ability to remain unseen. It was a different kind of bravery, a silent, powerful one, and she was better at it than anyone else. Frank Reynolds was gone from Harmony Creek. The local council removed him from his position, and the Veterans Memorial Park was put on hold until a proper audit could be done. People started talking about the park again, but this time, they spoke of a new plan, to honor David Thompson and all the other quiet heroes who had no loud stories to tell. Clara decided to take the job back at the auto shop, but she also started a new project. With the help of the town, they cleaned up the small section of the cemetery where David Thompson and others like him were buried. She and Eleanor worked together, weeding the grass and polishing the stones. It was a new kind of service, one that didn't require a uniform or a weapon, just a good heart and honest hands. The final scene of the story took place on a cool evening. Clara and Eleanor sat on the bench in the cemetery. They weren't talking. They were just sitting, watching the sun set, its light casting long shadows over the simple gravestones. The laughter of the town had been replaced by a quiet, deep respect. The woman they had once scorned was now the one they looked to for guidance, for wisdom, for the kind of quiet, genuine strength that could only be forged in fire. She didn't need their applause or their praise. She had something better. She had the truth, and she had her dignity back. And in Harmony Creek, that was all that truly mattered.